So we will continue with the next session, why inclusion matters in clinical trials. So now Professor Shaun Treweek will bring us his slide here. He's Professor of Health Services Research, Aberdeen, Centre for Evaluation, University of Aberdeen, and SENSITISE Project Consortium member.
Thank you, Paloma. And one thing that Jacques forgot to say right at the beginning when you were talking about James Lind. James Lind was Scottish. Very important fact for us all to remember. So I'm going to talk about why inclusion matters. And just to make life that little bit more tense, I've decided to use Slido, which is less simple than I thought. So let's see if I can make that work. I just jumped to mine. Yeah, here we are. Cool. Right. So, I'm involved in a project called SENSITISE. It's to do with training. So this is the question for you. Does your organization have a course? And by course, over a period of weeks, something substantial that discusses issues around inclusive trials. And let's see how that goes. So 12 people so far, and we'll see if we get to about 100 and then we'll stop. Okay, so that's great. Good, good, good. Or indeed, maybe there's a... This is excellent. Thank you very much.
All right, okay. Yes, apologies for the people online. I really don't like standing in one place. Okay, so let's sort of think of that as coming to a close now, because we've got a very, very striking result. So that most places then do not have a course. Some planned, and a few that do indeed have such a course. So next one. Is it necessary? So most people don't, in their organizations, have a course. Is creating such a course necessary? What do you think about that? Okay, so this is looking great for Francis Sheely, who leads SENSITISE, which is going to develop training. So you can see most people, the vast majority of people think, yes, there is some need. Not everybody, but there is a need for many, many people. So the idea here is that training is not widespread. There is some, but it's not widespread. And that many, many people think that the training is something that is really, really essential. Okay, so that's the end of the Slido. Let's see if I can get back to where I was before. And because I can't see this.
Cool. And I might try and stand here now. Right. We've heard from Tomas about the importance of thinking about radio mics, that's what we need. Thinking about who should be in your trial. And inclusivity is a design issue. It's about designing a trial or a piece of research that is going to provide the best possible scientific evidence to support improved patient care. That's what inclusion is about. It's a design issue. Do we have in our trial or other piece of health research a very good idea of who are the people who could benefit from this new intervention, this new treatment, this new initiative, this new way of doing things? And design in all pieces of research is a great place to mess up. You can make choices that are bad. And some of those choices will then live with you throughout your piece of work. That could be 5 years, it could be 10 years, and there is nothing you can do about that bad choice. And one area of making a bad choice is who. Who should be in our trial? Who are the people who have something to gain? And that can bake in inequality. We've already heard a bit of discussion about pregnancy. Maternal mortality is an example I'm going to use now. In the UK, where I'm based, overall maternal mortality is about 13.5 cases per 100,000. That's still high. However, if you look within those data, what you find is that for some groups of people, maternal mortality is much, much higher. So at the top here, we can see that black women, it's not 13.6, it's 35. It is much higher. If we were developing a trial to look at improving maternal mortality, we absolutely need to think about ethnicity. Look at the effect that maternal mortality has amongst black women. In Asian women, it is higher too. But not only that, and as Thomas was saying, talking about intersectionality, we can look at socioeconomic disadvantage too. That has an effect as well. And we also have age. That has an effect. And here in the UK, overweight individuals also have a much higher maternal mortality. So it would be wrong to design our trial without thinking about these sorts of things, because otherwise our science will be poorer. It's not this would be ideologically the good thing to do, which, I mean, it would, but it's poor science to not think about these issues. We want the best possible science, and that's what inclusion is about. Let's take Let's take another example. Cognitive impairment. This is a colleague of mine at the University of Cardiff in Wales in the United Kingdom, and she's very interested in how to involve people with cognitive impairment within trials to a much greater extent. So she did a systematic review, and this part of it is looking at hip fracture. And what my colleague Victoria Shepherd found was that amongst the studies that were looking at hip fracture, over 80% of them explicitly excluded people who had cognitive impairment from their studies. However, a third of all people with hip fracture have cognitive impairment. And if you remember that point I made with design, you can bake in an inequality. That single design decision, these people with cognitive impairment and hip fracture, the designers here have said, we don't care about them. We are not going to build their perspectives into our trial. What we are going to do is exclude them. They are not interesting to us. That has baked in an inequality, and that is bad science. A third of the population. Again, as Thomas was saying, these are not small numbers. We might sometimes think, wow, what does it matter? These are big numbers. A third of all the people who have something to gain have a characteristic that these researchers have explicitly chosen to exclude as uninteresting. That's what we want to avoid. That's why we need to think about inclusion. And this slide, sent to me by a colleague, Dr. Shoba Dawson, who we'll hear about later, is basically saying we need to think about the perspectives of those individuals who have something to benefit. And without thinking about those perspectives, engaging with those individuals, we are going to produce science that is poorer. Our results will not be as applicable as we would have wanted them to be. Our impact on improving patient health will be lower. And none of us want that. We want the maximum bang for buck from our research. This is a great quote, I think, from somebody who was part of discussions talking about uptake of COVID-19 vaccines in ethnic minority groups in the UK. And that individual said, "We don't have to change, you do." This is about us changing how we approach our research, the way we design it, the way we run it, the way we report it. We need to change. We need to reprogram ourselves. It's for us, not for these other groups and individuals to do something that we think they should do. It's us that needs to change. So I'm going to talk about 4 steps. And one of the other points that Thomas made right at the end when answering one of the questions is this is a process. We are starting something which will take us a long time to get really good at, but we have to start. So I think if we want to design inclusive trials, these are 4 things that we need to do to get better. And eventually we'll be really good. But if we start doing these things, I think we'll get better and we'll keep getting better and better. Okay, and as I say at the bottom here, we need the perspectives of all those individuals who we recognize as having something to gain from our new treatment or initiative, whatever it is. We need their perspectives as part of the design from the beginning and throughout. So let's start with the first one, who? Who to involve in our trial. Now, people like me in the past, I think, have historically got very, very concerned about how many people do we need for our trial, a sample size calculation. Do we need 500? Blimey, we need 2,500 people. What we have been less concerned about generally, beyond the clinical characteristics, is who are the 2,500 people when it comes to characteristics such as we saw earlier in the maternal mortality, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, age, potentially other characteristics. Who are they? Who has something to gain? Who could benefit from the improved care that we hope our trial will lead to? So we have to know more than their clinical characteristics, their eligibility characteristics clinically, and we need to know more than that there needs to be 2,500 of them. We need to start thinking about, yes, but who are they really? And this is hard. It's harder than you think. There was a discussion earlier in Thomas's talk about data, access to data. Access to data that tell us things such as what is the prevalence of this particular condition amongst sexual minorities, for example, very hard to find. How are we going to identify whether there are groups amongst sexual minorities that are very important for our trial? Can often be very hard. Same is true for ethnicity. Same is true for gender. Same is true for socioeconomic status. Can be hard. This is why it will be a long process. But this project that I was involved with was looking at ethnicity. And what we tried to do there, we brought panels together. We brought groups of people who were like the people who would design a trial. And we got bunches of trials that were complete. And we said, well, this is the trial we're thinking of. And of course, it had already been done by somebody else. We were pretending. And we said, who do you think should be involved? And we gave them epidemiological data, prevalence data, severity data as best we could, gave them the basic design of the trial, and had a discussion. Who do you think should be in this trial? And you can look to the paper if you wanted to, but the headline issue is it was very hard. It was very hard because in most cases there was little data to inform those discussions. So what we were wanting them to do was to say, you need in this trial to recruit a population that includes, for example, 20% of Pakistani women for these reasons. And that was very, very difficult for them to do because that ethnicity data did not exist in most cases. And that is a problem for us. And again, it's something we should all push as far as we can that we need to collect these sorts of data more often, in the way that Thomas was encouraging us to a moment ago. Without these data, it is hard for us to make good decisions about who. But we should try and do the best we can and get better. And there are some defaults within that. So if you can't find data, what would you do? And the recommendation there was census data as best you can in the areas where you are recruiting. It's not perfect, but it's that little bit better. Okay, so you could have a look at that, but that's ethnicity only. And within the READY project that we've heard about already, we are intending to extend that idea and gain some defaults and some methods for other characteristics like socioeconomic disadvantage, like gender, like location, where are people as well, age, of course. So to try and give trial teams some tools and advice, practical things that will make this job that bit easier. And one of the challenges we will have in all of this is how to do that when data are often very hard to come by. That is a real challenge for all of us. Now, let's imagine that we have made a decision about who we want to involve, either because we have wonderful data and we know exactly, or because we've made some best decisions based on discussion, some data, and some defaults that are recommendations. Our next challenge is how on earth do we involve those individuals in our trial? And this is very important. If you do what you did last time, you will fail. That's the point. And again, I think, Thomas, you talked about hard to reach. No, we tend not to look. And looking and engaging will be different to what we have generally done in almost all cases, I would say. And this is a great quote. If you're not doing something intentional, something deliberate and proactive to include, you will accidentally exclude. Won't be intentional exclusion, but you will not find those individuals in your trial. You have to do something. The design has to be different to engage with groups and communities that you and many other people like you as researchers have neglected in the past. And I very much include myself in that group, and I'll show you an example of that later on. There are some tools, so there's a couple of examples up here, things that can get you thinking, things that can give you ideas, particularly because I have done quite a lot around ethnicity. There are certainly tools around ethnicity. But what you will struggle with, and what we all really want is, right, I know I need to include older women from sexual minority groups. What are the evidence-based strategies that I could use to engage with those individuals? You will almost certainly find nothing. That is a massive problem for us, this lack of rigorous evidence to inform our decisions about the actual recruitment and retention of some of these groups. Things to think about, though, in general, is how would we build trust? And again, Thomas talked about trust. And in your question earlier, I think you mentioned people provide data that it might be biased in some way. How do we know it's correct? One reason is that if people don't trust you, the way they answer your question will be modified by that lack of trust if they choose to answer it at all. And that certainly comes out with ethnicity. What are they going to do with these data? What do I need to think about when it comes to the way I answer that question? Who might do me harm by that answering of the question? It's certainly come up in discussions around vaccines that I've had. But how do we build trust? Who has trust? Can people that are trusted work with us so that we together can generate trust to enable engagement? Communication. How are we communicating about our piece of work? So in some languages and some cultures, the idea of research is quite different to what we think. And before we can start launching into trials and randomization, we need to tackle that fact that perhaps research is a different sort of concept in that particular culture. So communication is important, and convenience. And I think, again, Thomas, you mentioned, why on earth would we bring people to our hospital 3 times a week for the next 3 months? That's bound to cause us problems, and it will cause us problems with everybody, not just particular groups who may historically have been underserved. Our design, regardless of who we're thinking of involving, should think about those 3 things. They always come up in qualitative work talking about barriers and enablers to taking part in trials. Trust, communication, convenience. There is some help though, and this is ethnicity, again, linked to work done by my colleague, Dr. Shoba Dawson at the University of Sheffield. And this provides some practical advice on how to engage with individuals from ethnic minority groups. UK focus, although I think there's wide applicability, but it is UK focused. And it comes up with a number of key recommendations. We chose 4 areas. So, for example, you want to make sure your eligibility criteria don't restrict engagement and involvement in ways that you don't expect. So one example would be to choose a recruitment path that is not used by some groups in the way you think it does. So one example I've used is around dental care. If you are doing a trial in the UK in primary dental practice, that assumes that everybody uses primary dental practice. If they don't, your trial is not going to recruit them because your recruitment pathway has assumed that they will appear in primary dental practice. They may not. And if they don't turn up, they're not going to help or be helped by your intervention. So you might need to think more broadly. Where would we find individuals? The second one is about your materials. Think about inclusion. It could be language, but it could be also about the way it's delivered, who's delivering it, how it's delivered. But the way that information is delivered, that's the communication bit that I mentioned earlier. Very important. It's unlikely that there is one thing that will work for everyone. Training. This is ethnicity, so cultural humility is probably what I would call that now, a bit more broadly. Thinking about that there may well be other ways of thinking about our piece of research or thinking about research and whether it is sensible or not for a person to be involved, to be respectful of other people's views, and that training can help, and that ought to be an important part of what we do. And then partnerships, trust. Very often, because we have not worked as researchers with some groups, it is unlikely that we have the trust of communities that we have historically ignored, but other groups will. Could we partner with them? So in this example, it was community organizations from diverse ethnic groups who worked with us on a number of projects. And they bring the trust, not us. We don't have that, but they bring that. And over time, we all develop trust in each other. But we need them to start with, because they are the trusted partner, not us as researchers. And SENSITISE, just to flag that again, that is an initiative that will provide, I hope, some training to help with some of this. Now, let's say we've got that far. We've done step 2, we've done a how. It's very important that we keep track of how are we doing. So we set some targets. How are we doing? And that means monitoring. And if you want to monitor, that leads to 2 things. What will we collect? There's some help here with this initiative called Pro-EDI. It will give you some advice about what to collect to be able to make general judgments about inclusion, equity in general. And then the next thing you should be thinking about is what happens if we rapidly recruit some groups but not others, and we have a fixed number of places within our trial. And you could have a look at this protocol. This is not a trial, but Alana had ceilings, caps. And essentially what that meant was that if recruitment of some groups went fast, which looked to threaten the availability of places in that study for other groups, they would stop recruitment of the fast recruiting groups to enable other groups to be involved in that trial, because recruitment was running at different rates for different groups. It's a very natural consequence of taking seriously inclusion and monitoring how you're doing. You may well need to stop recruitment of some groups to ensure your trial is inclusive. And then coming to the end now, so reporting. We need to tell the world how we're doing, even if we didn't do very well. And the reason for that is because that makes it very transparent that this research, although we tried to involve this group and this group and this group, we didn't do a great job. So the results of our research, although impressive for some groups, we have very limited ability to say that it would also work for these groups because we failed to engage those groups in our research. That sort of reporting is needed. What are the implications of differences between who we wanted in our trial or research and who we actually have? And this is an example from a trial I was involved with, and it was a lifestyle change trial, cancer prevention. And really, if you look here, this is just one bit of it, it's just the ethnicity bit. Really, what we should have seen was a population that looked, I guess, at least like the local population with regard to ethnicity. And some evidence would suggest that some groups, particularly in this case, black women, we should have perhaps been very, very careful to ensure that they were involved in our trial, made efforts, done something different. And look at the results up here at the top. We failed. Almost everybody in that trial was white British. One reason for that was the referral route we chose. The example I gave you a moment ago about dental practices, it's the same thing here. We used a way into our trial that made it less likely that we would have ethnic diversity. So we failed. So what we conclude here is, okay, it seemed to be effective, but really we can only say it's effective amongst white British individuals. We have very little to say about other ethnic groups with regard to this intervention. Will it be something they would be interested in? Don't know. We certainly haven't shown that they would be. And this makes it transparent. It shows the limitations of our work, even though we were not successful. We're not trying to hide this. This is important information for people who may wish to use these results in their own policy making or care provision. So this is the last slide. So in summary, it's important for us to think about inclusion because inclusion is better science. It means we involve the people who we need to involve in our trial for those results to be applicable to all of those who could potentially benefit from it. We want to improve the health of everybody who has the problem that our trial is targeting. And we cannot do that without thinking about who should be in our trial. We cannot do that without thinking about inclusion. And to do less than that is to do poor science. Thank you very much.
Okay. So now, time for questions.
Thank you very much for the lecture, very sharp. I'm Daniel Schwarz from Czech Republic, by the way, and I really liked your idea about active inclusion or even engagement. Anyway, before we all change our approach to the design, how do you see the role of registries and non-interventional studies in eliminating the evidence gaps of the underserved populations?
So it's likely to be helpful. Like any data that can help would be useful. But I think the thing, and again, Thomas spoke to this, I think the thing to be aware of when using any data that are out there for us is to what extent do we believe that these data are an accurate reflection of the people who have the condition. So to get into, let's say, a surgical register, which we have a lot of in Scotland, that assumes that you are offered surgery in the same way uniformly across all groups within society, or that all groups feel that they should approach their health practitioner in the same way, and then they end up being offered surgery. So I think there needs to be some awareness that that is not definitely true in all cases. There needs to be that. Will this underestimate in any way the issues around surgery for some groups if we take the surgery register? So I think all data can be helpful, but we shouldn't believe it immediately. I think we should question it. And clearly, if you look in the evidence with regard to diagnosis, and certainly for ethnicity, which is an area I do a bit more in, the diagnoses of some conditions among some ethnicities is lower than you might expect it to be. Like, why would you expect that difference? And it has been linked to the willingness of health professionals to provide that diagnosis for some ethnicities. So question the data, but I think all data have a role and could be useful as long as we have that little question mark in our head against them.
Hi, Shaun. So I'm from the pharma industry, Roche. Thanks for your talk. I was reflecting on how lucky we are in the pharma industry that we actually, when we work on a new solution, a new compound, we work from research to preclinical to early clinical. So we have lots of evidences that we can build, and we can actually strategically decide and have some trial that will focus on this aspect and that aspect. I'm wondering, outside of this framework where we have actually multiplicity of trials, whether there would be value to clearly prioritize and have a scientific method to say among all the factors of diversity that are potentially of interest in a given condition, how can we scientifically prioritize or help say we will focus on A and B but not on the 10s, and that would be super helpful.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I don't really have much to say beyond I agree. And I think there are plenty of challenges and plenty of problems, and some prioritization will be essential. And I think even within a single trial, if you're looking to make design decisions about who, you are quickly going to have to make some decisions about priorities. There are many, many groups, but we are going to choose to focus on these groups, and other groups we will try not to exclude, but we will focus on some. So I think prioritization is a key part of what we're doing. So we want to get better. It's going to take a long time to be perfect, and prioritization is part of that, I think. And anything we can do to make that prioritization evidence-informed would be welcomed.
So I have two other comments. When I did attend webinars where patients were, we were talking about this topic, they said they are likely to trust more people that look like them. And so I found that, when you were talking about collecting data and building trust and the communication, this is sometimes a piece that we tend to forget, is that even in our healthcare system and industry, and we tend to have also a lack of representation of the different people. And the other one is a comment that really did strike me, is that they said, you come and you do your research, but we want to do the research ourselves because we know who we are. And I think that's another piece when we talk about building databases and data that are more, accurate, is that maybe we need to switch the organization and think about how we give them the ability to do their own research and contributing to the data set.
Definitely. So I'll give you a very quick answer to the first one, or response rather. The STRIDE project that I mentioned that Dr. Shoba Dawson led, one of the recommendations was we need more diversity in research teams. There's an explicit recognition of that. And in some other bits of work done by myself and others, much more recognition of the need to think differently about how we design research, and indeed who are the drivers of that research and who sets the agenda. So I agree entirely with both of those points.
So just one question from the remote audience. So any thought about the country-specific difference regarding the underserved population definition, and how then to include in when we are doing a European clinical research?
Okay, so I guess an easy-ish answer and then not a very good answer at all. So the first one, will there be differences? Yes, absolutely. So that's why I don't think there is a universal definition of these are the underrepresented, the underserved groups. That will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, country to country, region to region. And I think we need to think to some extent locally about that. What's important in our jurisdiction? Let's say it was Scotland. What's important to us? Now, so I agree with that. There are differences. We would need to do our best to identify who's important in each jurisdiction. The hard question is, right, we want to do an international trial. What are we going to do about those differences? And that is one of the things that we're going to solve in READY. So I'm optimistic that we'll come to some way of dealing with that in a practical way, even if it's not perfect. But it is a big flag waving that what about international trials where the, let's say, underserved ethnic groups in this country are somewhat different to the underserved ethnic groups in that country. People who could benefit might be slightly different. I guess at the headline I'll think, well, we need to consider ethnicity, we need to consider age, we need to consider gender, and just acknowledge that there will be differences within each jurisdiction under each of those headings, and try not to worry too much about it. But wait for READY, and we'll have something that's practical and useful by, well before the end of that project, I think. But it's a flag that we all need to be aware of. Thank you.